So this is a monstrous power amplifier that you can build yourself using the latest GaNFet or gallium nitride technology. And gallium nitride offers a lot of benefits in comparison to silicon counterparts. For example, it offers faster switching capabilities, it offers higher thermal capabilities, it offers better waveform, much closer to the ideal waveform that we're looking for. And all of this obviously translates to better measured performance, including distortion, slew rate, and so on. And all the measurements are detailed on the website for these guys, Orchard Audio, so I'll link that in the description below for you to check out all the nitty-gritty measurements they've done to this unit. But while I finish undoing all the screws so that I can show you what's inside, a quick message from the sponsor of today's video. Revival Audio released the Atlante 4 loudspeakers last month. Revival Audio strives to offer ultra-high-end boutique loudspeakers with leading transducer technology at a reasonable price. It is also designed and engineered by one of the leading experts in the industry, including late Daniel Imont, who has been a key figure in designing loudspeakers for many of the top brands like Focal and Dynaudio. Make sure to check the link in the description to check out their latest speaker, the Atlante 4s. Okay, so if you look inside, this is the power supply, and this is the left channel and the right channel separate Class D amp modules. It is a fully balanced design. It only has XLR inputs at the back. And if you need RCA inputs, then you have to purchase a separate converter. Now, as you can see, it's a very simplistic design. There's not a lot of stuff going on here, and that's the beauty with a unit like this, is that it's fully modular. In fact, you can change out the power supply, you can change out the modules once there's upgrades in the future. This is in fact a 2.0 version. They had a 1.0 before this one where they had a different power supply. So if you have the 1.0, you can easily switch to the 2.0 by upgrading your power supply in the future. Now, looking at the simplistic design, you may think this outputs not a lot of power, but this is a beastly amplifier. This outputs 250 watts into 8 ohms, 500 watts, so it doubles into 4 ohms, and it's even stable down to 2 ohms. So it's a very capable amplifier. Now, they do sell a true dual mono version of this, so that's why you see an empty space right here. That's where the extra power supply, just like this one, would go right here. So it will have a power supply for the left channel and the right channel separately, making it a true dual mono design. However, that one costs $4,000. This one right here, if you buy it as a kit so that you can build it yourself to save some money, then this one is $2,100 shipped in the US. And that includes the casing work, that includes the cables, everything you need except for solder and some tools like screwdrivers or whatever that you may need. But let's say you don't want to build one yourself, then you can buy a finished version, fully completed version for $2,650 US with shipping included. In terms of the chassis design, it's nothing special. It is metal, but you don't get an amplifier like this for a pretty chassis. You get it for the ultimate value and performance. So how does it stack up to something higher end and higher priced? I compared it to 4 different amplifiers, and I'll be sharing with you my experience when I A/B compared those amplifiers to this one. Using the Arender N20 as the streamer and the PS Audio Gold Stellar DAC, and also using the internal pre-amplifier inside the DAC as well, I was able to play around with the Orchard Audio Starkrimson for a few months now, and I have a really good idea of what it sounds like. And first of all, the highlight of the show, at least for me, was the bass, bar none. The bass is incredible, not just for the size or the weight of this amplifier, but it is akin to really monstrous Class AB and Class A amplifiers I have heard in the past. The bass is super extended, it is super quick, transient. There's nothing to complain about with the bass. The bass is phenomenal, and there is no doubt that this amplifier is a very powerful amplifier that can drive and really drive, not just in volume, but really drive a speaker with incredible dynamics and control. In fact, in the later part of this video, I'll be comparing the Starkrimson to amplifiers that I believe has really good transients, it has equal amounts of bass control and finesse that I feel like is comparable. And the funny thing is that they're all more expensive than the Starkrimson. Starkrimson is by far the least expensive amplifier that I have had in here that has this amount of bass control and dynamics. In terms of the overall tonality of this amplifier, I find that the overall sound signature is neutral with a little bit of emphasis in the bass and a little bit of edge and definition around strings and voices. or vocals. And maybe because of the neutral nature of this amplifier with emphasis a little bit on the bass and a little bit of edge in the vocals and strings, I found it to be a really good match with neutral to warm loudspeakers. And personally, I found the Burson X2 loudspeakers that I reviewed recently, as well as the Bucard S400 Mark II, to be a really good match with the Orchard Audio Starkrimson amplifier. The first amplifier that I compared with the Starkrimson was none other than the Burson Audio Monoblocks, and this amplifier is one of my favorites. It's very great with transients and attack and decay, so I thought it was a perfect comparison. Now overall, the Starkrimson in terms of bass is more fuller sounding, it extends more. But in terms of the mid bass, the quickness, the transients, the speed and decay was very much comparable on both. Now the Burson Monoblocks are Class AB amplifiers with first 30 watts in Class A, which is quite incredible. And maybe because of that, but I did find that the Burson Audio Monoblocks were leaner in its presentation, while the Starkrimson was a little bit more meaty and more bold in the mid-range, more fuller sounding. And both are pretty neutral, not that one is warmer than the other, but I did feel like the Starkrimson was slightly more fuller and therefore a little bit more warmer than the Burson Audio in the mid-range. Now, however, when it comes to vocal passages or string instruments, I did find that the Burson Audio had less of an edge, less of a definition, and that may be depending on taste, something that you want, that edge and definition, or something that you don't want. But personally for me, I did prefer the vocal and the string presentation of the Burson that just flowed more musically for me. In terms of the high frequency presentation, I found that the Burson Audio was a little bit more extended and had a little bit more emphasis in the high frequency than the Starkrimson. But not in a bright or aggressive way, rather I found that it was more airy and spacious sounding, and I think that the Starkrimson was more detailed, but the Burson Audio was a little bit more airy kind of feeling. And that takes us to the soundstage. And the soundstage and imaging capability is quite different with the Starkrimson and the Burson Audio. First of all, the Burson Audio excels in soundstaging. It just sounds more spacious, it just sounds more open, width and depth. In terms of imaging, however, I found that both the Starkrimson and the Burson Audio performed on equal grounds with really locked in center, really good side imaging, really good micro details and all that. So they were pretty much on par. The Burson Monoblocks are really good amplifiers. I really love them. But keep in mind that they are $1,000 more than the Starkrimson, and they do not have that kind of bass control or bass amount in terms of extension. For next comparison, I had the Forte 1 from AXXES or Audio Denmark Group. And this is an all-in-one integrated amplifier with streamer, DAC, and everything built in. So keeping that in mind, when I first compared it, the first thing that came to my mind was, well, not quite 100%, but if they decided to make an amplifier version, only amplifier version of the Forte 1, this would be, again, not quite, but similar to what I would expect. Firstly, comparing the bass performance, I found that the Starkrimson had more extension, more boldness, more meatiness in both the sub bass and the mid bass. But the Forte ones were faster in its attack and decay, transient response, it was just more faster and tactile. So as far as I'm concerned, that's 2 wins in a row for the Starkrimson in terms of the bass. Like I said, this thing is crazy with the bass. From bass to treble, the Orchard Audio sounds fuller, like I said, while the Forte 1 is very clean cut, precise separation with complete blackness in between instruments and vocals, which sounded overall a little bit of a leaner presentation to me in comparison to the Starkrimson. In terms of the sound staging and imaging capability on both of these amplifiers, I found that they are very much comparable and not really one is better than the other, they're about the same. However, if I have to really nitpick, I would say that the Forte 1 has better imaging capabilities because of its natural sound characteristic and clean-cut nature, while the soundstage sounded a little bit more grand and open sounding with the Starkrimson. But these are slight differences and more akin to the overall sound characteristic taking in place of the performance of imaging and sound staging. For my next comparison was the HDD Tempo, which is something that I haven't reviewed on this channel yet, so you guys are getting a little early kind of dip into this. But this amplifier is simply the closest sound signature with the Starkrimson in terms of the overall sound characteristic. Maybe, just maybe, it has to do with the fact that both of these are GaNFet designs. From the meaty bass to the full sound to the soundstage and imaging capabilities, they're all about the same and all about very similar tonal characteristic, so it is very much comparable. there is only 3 things that I found to be different with the Tempo and the Starkrimson. The first one is that the Tempo seemed to have a more refined edges, so more smooth mid-range and high frequency while maintaining the micro details, which I personally liked. Number 2 is that the Tempo has actually more sub-bass amounts and more gut and guttiness to it. So to a point where I felt like I needed to pull the speakers out of the room a little bit more. So yeah, mighty beast. The third difference I found was that the Starkrimson felt more extended, a little bit more detail oriented, with a little bit more edge to the sound and kind of definition to the sound in the strings and the vocals as well. So overall, very similar, and these are the 3 differences I found in the long run. Now we're going up in price, and the next is one of my references, the AGD Audience. Actually, I decided to buy the Audience after I compared it to the Starkrimson. It was actually one of my first comparisons because I was deciding if I should buy the AGD Audience, despite the price point, or if the Starkrimson was similar enough to where I could just buy the Starkrimson. At least for me, I really enjoyed the Audience, so it was worth it for me to purchase the Audience. Again, maybe because it's using GaNFet design, the overall sound signature, the tonal characteristic is very much similar. However, as great as the Tempo is and the Starkrimson is, I found that the refinement in the mid-range and high frequency, that analog smoothness while retaining all those micro details inside the music, was on a different level with the Audience in my opinion. And that's mainly why I bought it. It also has this more atmospheric, more grand sound that to me sounds, to my ears sound more mature, high-end sound with all those micro details placed correctly within that grand soundstage. It just sounds to me a more mature kind of high-end sound. I will say though, while the bass control and the dynamics is no slouch on the Audience whatsoever, the Tempo and the Starkrimson actually has more bass, more in amount, more extension, more gut to the sound. So if you're a fan of bass and bass control, I think the Starkrimson and Tempo takes it there. Again, not by a huge margin. All 3 of these amplifiers have really good bass and control and extension and dynamics. However, by a small margin, I found the Tempo and the Starkrimson to take the cake here with a more full sound. And as I've mentioned and promised, I compared the Starkrimson to more higher end, higher priced amplifiers. And during the comparison, as you've probably seen, the price kept going up. And that's because there is simply no frill with the Orchard Audio Starkrimson. It may not have the prettiest casing work, but undoubtedly it delivers similar performance and sound quality as many of its more higher priced rivals with little shortcomings when compared side by side. If you were looking for something to deliver with similar performance as the higher end components I've mentioned, but just couldn't justify the cost or was out of your budget, the Starkrimson is a no-brainer, a steal even, especially considering that the Starkrimson has the highest power rating out of all the amps we've compared today, which can become really handy when you're trying to drive difficult to drive loudspeakers or power demanding loudspeakers with more headroom and authority. Also, I really wanted to try different preamplifiers with the Starkrimson, as I know that a great synergy with a preamplifier can really bring an amplifier to a different level. Now, most of the preamplifiers that you will see in this video are tube preamplifiers, and the reason for that is because people have really great results using tube preamplifiers with Class D amplifiers like the Starkrimson. And personally, I've tested dozen different preamplifiers from solid state to tube, and every single time, these were my 3 best choices. Now, keep in mind that unfortunately, these preamplifiers are double the price of the Starkrimson or more in some cases. And the reason for that is mainly 2 things. Number 1, I truly believe the Starkrimson punches above its price point, and to get the best out of it, I should be pairing it with something as high caliber and high performance as the Starkrimson. And when I tested dozen different preamplifiers, well, the 3 best ones were double the price or more than the Starkrimson. However, also keep in mind that the preamplifier companies that I'm mentioning in this video also has less expensive offerings that will give you similar tonality, similar house sound signature, and similar synergy, but it won't necessarily give you the same envelope of performance, obviously. Now, also keep in mind that the less expensive tube preamplifiers usually come with only RCA and no balanced outputs, and you need balanced outputs for the Starkrimson, since Starkrimson does not have a RCA input. And that leads me to my second reasoning, which is kind of an excuse more than a reasoning. I didn't have the converter, so don't be like me, buy the converter if you don't want to be like me and having to use tube preamplifiers with balanced outputs that usually cost way more. The first two preamplifier I decided to try was the Auric Audio Motherload preamplifier. And honestly speaking, the first 30 minutes, I didn't think it was a really good match with the Starkrimson, as it was a little bit too harsh for me. But 30 minutes in, it started to warm up and it was a completely different sound and I was blown away. This is a really good match with the Starkrimson. Incredible mid-range density with no hint of dryness. And it has that elastic kind of feeling, if you know what I mean, with sparkly highs, and it was just magical. And while the vocals and the instruments were more smoother and less edge to the sound now than what I had with the Starkrimson with the PS Audio Stellar Gold DAX internal preamplifier, I found that there was still a little bit of edge that gave definition. Soundstage was simply incredible with holographic imagery, and it felt like I could just reach in and grab the singer. Now that's pretty creepy, but that's what it felt like. I was like, whoa, you're there. I'm a fan. The bass was still nothing to complain about. I mean, really good extension still, really good boldness, really full, meaty bass that I was getting. But obviously compared to a solid state preamplifier, I did get less bass output by a small margin, really. It was not really a concern for me whatsoever. Both the Burson X2 and the Bucard S400 sounded really good, but honestly, the Bucard pairing surprised me how much of a good match it was. I've had the Bucard S400 for a while now, and I think this is quite honestly literally top 3 of the best sound I've ever heard out of the Bucard S400 Mark II. I honestly didn't feel like unhooking the Auric preamplifier, but hey, I had to. And my god, am I glad that I did, because the A&K preamplifier, in my opinion, was even better to my taste with the Starkrimson. As great as the soundstage was with the Auric preamplifier, I mean the soundstage with the A&K was just next level. It was more grand, and the imagery that the Starkrimson is capable of, all the micro details, the instrument placement within that humongous, two preamplifier soundstage that it was giving. I mean, it was just simple. I was in nirvana. I was in a totally different, I listened to the Auric and I was like, how can it get better than this? And then I hook up the A&K and I'm just like, okay, all right. Do I have to even say this? It's a simply an amazing match with the Starkrimson. And this is going to be a little bit taste dependent. Your taste may be different from mine. But what I really loved about this pairing's tonality overall and the pairing's synergy was the upper mid-range edge with the vocals and instruments that I was talking about with Starkrimson. With the A&K pairing, totally gone, totally smooth. And it sounded so analog to me, and this is a streamer setup. And I have to say, with streamer setups, I think this is probably one of the few instances where I felt like I was listening to a total analog setup with a turntable, a reel-to-reel type of deal. And I really love the fact that while it was smooth and the edge was gone, all the micro details were floating in the air and highs were still sparkly, and I wasn't missing any detail or nuance in the music, even though, again, that edge and definition was gone. It was so smooth. And I love that silky smoothness. I don't know about you, but it's just so satisfying, and it's just easy to listen for really long periods of time with musical enjoyment that's enveloping you with this grand soundstage. It was just nirvana for me. However, overall, dynamics, slam, speed, and extension of the bass was slightly less with the A&K, but only in comparison to solid-state preamplifiers, and only by a small margin in comparison to the RX preamplifier that I mentioned previously. Now, once again, both the Burson X2 and the Bucard S400 Mark II sounded really good with this pairing. No complaints whatsoever. However, if I have to choose, I would say that the Burson X2 was a better pairing in my opinion. It just sounded so great, especially because as a tower speaker, it was more dynamic and had more bass. So it was so more satisfying. I just absolutely loved it with the X2s. Now, last but not the least was the PS Audio BHK signature preamplifier. This preamplifier is really special to me because it was designed in collaboration with the late Baskin King, who is a legend in the industry. And he designed this and it sounds so good to me, and it was one of those reference preamplifiers that I had when I used to work in the store. It's something that I listen to for really long periods of time and something that it's always a go-to. It never failed me. It just sounded really good and musical to me with great bass authority. So I definitely had to get it in. And this was more of a control for me because I know this preamplifier like the back of my hand. So I wanted to see what it brings to the table when it's paired with something like the Starkrimson. Now I do have to mention, perhaps because I am currently using a DAC from PS Audio as well, or maybe because this is not a full-on tube preamp, but a tube input stage with a solid-state output stage, by far, by a huge landslide, the bass was the most robust, most extended, most in amount, and it was just incredible dynamics with this preamplifier. Now, however, the soundstage wasn't as grand or large, as a full-on tube preamplifier as I mentioned in this video. However, I really like the fact that it really highlighted the, pairing's capability to really separate things, and it was much more quieter, blacker background, really good separation going on with really good micro details and placement of instruments within the soundstage given. And honestly, the soundstage wasn't small at all. It was only in comparison to tube preamplifiers. And I honestly really dig the fact that I'm getting all this detail and separation without any hint of brightness or aggressive tones whatsoever. Now, however, back to that vocal and instrument upper mid-range kind of edge and definition I was talking about. That's dependent on taste, of course, like I said. And again, my taste is the smoother A and K. But with the PS Audio, just like the AXXES preamplifier, it did still have a little bit more edge than the A and K. And again, that may be entirely up to your preference, whether you want that or the totally smooth A and K's tonality. Now, in terms of the high frequency, I felt that it wasn't as extended as the AXXES or the A&K's preamplifier, but I did feel like it had just enough air, like it wasn't like totally rolled off or compressed or anything like that. It had good air, just not as much as the two preamplifiers I mentioned, and it still had really good detail and just enough sparkle in my opinion. As for the speaker pairing, I honestly had so much trouble which one. But if I have to choose, I would say that I honestly preferred the Buchardt S400 Mark II with this pairing. And by only a small margin, only because the Buchardt S400 Mark II is a bookshelf speaker and it gave me a larger soundstage. But that was the only deciding factor. Both sounded incredible with this pairing, especially in terms of the bass dynamics and the great separation that this pairing brings out with these speakers. Now, lastly, I'll say this. Okay, so if you don't want to get a separate preamplifier and you want a DAC with a preamplifier built in, I would just go with the Gold Stellar PS Audio DAC because that was what I was using to compare the different amplifiers. And honestly, it is a surprisingly amazing match with the Starkrimson. Yes, it doesn't have the grand soundstage as the two preamplifiers, but it has really good soundstaging and has really good bass authority. It has, really good nuance, and all the description that I did describe about the Starkrimson's overall sound signature is all relevant. And I think overall it's a really, really good match, and you should definitely consider it if you don't want to get a separate preamplifier. Now, I only have really one issue or critique with the Starkrimson, if you can't even call it a problem, because there's a very simple solution for it. But it's the casing. The casing is good quality, it's metal. However, it vibrates when I put my hand on it. I can feel it vibrate, especially when I play bass demanding tracks. And this is a problem that's non-existent with the higher end, higher priced amplifiers because they come in much better casings. So what I did was that I put isoacoustic feet underneath the Starkrimson's amplifier, and that seemed to help, but it didn't fully get rid of the vibrations. So I thought, okay, well, maybe some of the vibration is airborne and is interfering with the casing. So I put something heavy, like another component on top of the Starkrimson, and that problem went away. And I did go back and forth between, putting something on top of it and taking it off. And I found that, honestly speaking, it seemed to actually affect the sound, at least for me. I just found that the bass was tighter, more cleaner, especially the mid-range was cleared up, and the nuances and details came through more naturally. And sure, of course, it could have been just all in my head, but I did feel like it did actually make a difference, at least for me. And it's a free tweak that you can try, putting something heavy on top of it and taking it off and back and forth. And, vibration is never a good thing. So why not put something on top of it so the chassis doesn't vibrate? So that's pretty much it from me. I hope this video was enjoyable. If it was, please click the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on my next audio journey. Until next time. you.